Welcome to Positive Philter with your host, Philip Wilkerson, a podcast that focuses on friends, family, health, and career with a little self-help around the way. Please join me in this journey for self-improvement, and I hope that what I have to share will make you a better person, thus making the world a better place. Positive Philter listeners, it's Philip Wilkerson back with another mini episode of the Positive Philter. For this episode, I wanted to just share with you, the listeners, some podcasts that I listen to. So I do listen to big name podcasts from NPR, such as First Take or This American Life or S-Town or podcasts such as that. But for this list particularly, I wanted to highlight the podcasts that I listen to from people I consider peers or people that are not backed by big studio companies. These are people, everyday Americans, that are creating great content, great podcasts to listen to out of their homes, out of their home studios. And I just really enjoy listening to them, taking inspiration from those podcasts and adapting them to my podcast. But also, I feel like these podcasts teach me something, make me grow, and become a better person. And I guess that's what the Positive Philter is about. So I'm going to run down this list of the 10 podcasts that I particularly listen to. I mean, I listen to more than just 10, but these are 10 that I would like to highlight for this mini episode. And I encourage you to check them out. I have links to their iTunes because I'm an iTunes guy, but they're also, I believe their podcasts are on other mediums, but I have their links so that you can check them out and listen to them. And I just give a little bit of explanation about what attracted me or what I draw from each of those podcasts. So number one is Women Transcend Podcast. I joined a podcast group on Facebook called DC Podcast Community. And just by happenstance, I came across a podcast called Women Transcend Podcast. It's by Jennifer Todd, and it's a great podcast, a viewpoint of women's perspectives on a variety of topics, but how that affects women and their experience. So, for instance, I listened to an episode recently about the alt-right and white supremacist groups and how that has effect on women, and how those groups necessarily are male chauvinistic groups. And there's other topics, but for me, I believe that as a father, I don't have a little girl, but if I were to have a little girl, I need to be informed about things and issues that would affect my potential daughter, but also I'm a husband and things that will affect my wife. So I think it's a great podcast, not just for women, just because it has a feminist approach. I think that it's a podcast that could be share information for both, for all genders, not just women. So it's a great podcast. Check that out. The next one is the God Show or Odd Show. Odd Show. The G is silent. So he says that in the tagline, but I keep on pronouncing it God Show. But it's the Odd Show. The G is silent. And it's by a friend of mine named Bruce Pagano. He lives out in Idaho. I was introduced to his podcast by my co-host, Hillard McMorris. He's a Christian, and he takes the everyday approach of how his Christianity or how Christianity is played out in his life. I believe that he is pursuing a counseling degree in Christianity, Christian counseling. And while I'm exploring my faith, exploring my religion, getting myself back into church, I find it as a good resource to connect with other people that are practicing their faith that are not necessarily, super holy men, everyday men. And I find his topics very, very helpful. I listen to it on the way to church, so it's like double church for me. So it's a great podcast. If you're not a practicing Christian, I still think, exploring other religions and their viewpoints. I listen to other podcasts too from other religions, but I think still, even if you're not a Christian, you can take away some growth and some things from this podcast. So it's a good one. The Meaningful Show. This podcast is by Dean Picari, who I dubbed as my podcast mentor. Very early on, when I was starting the Positive Filter, I reached out to Dean because he was a friend of my good friend Sam Nang, and he helped me really launch the Positive Filter by just giving me tips. He showed me how to, start a podcast. He gave me some feedback. He listened to a couple episodes. I always encourage you to find someone, if you want to do something, find someone that's doing it consistently very well. Dean Bakari does a podcast on productivity and just kind of like life hacks. So he's just a great resource on getting things done, living your life like you give a damn. That's his tagline. So he was really, really helpful, and I'm really, really thankful for him. And I'm going to be seeing him at my friend Sam Nang's wedding coming up. So can't wait to meet you, Dean. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. And listen to his podcast. The next two podcasts are involving some really close friends of mine. Ronald Young Jr. He helps edit. If you listen to the end of all my episodes, my main full episodes, Ronald Young is the one that helped me edit my podcast or just show me some things. And he's involved with two podcasts, which I list and I do listen to. So he supports me. I definitely support him. One of his own single podcast, his venture is called Time Well Spent. He has his fan favorite Peggy Lee, who's his mother, on there as a frequent guest. But he just takes everyday scenarios, dating, Facebook debates and arguments, the Fast and Furious, his reaction to watching those films, and he just delivers it in a very clever and fun, entertaining way. It's like his storytelling is really good, and so I enjoy listening to his podcast. And then another branch off of another branch off of his studio, Old Big Ron Studios, is Talking Loud and Saying Nothing with his co-host, it's hosted by Michael Jefferson, and Ronald is a frequent guest on that episode, on that show. Talking Loud, Saying Nothing is another just discussion show. They answer questions from listeners. They talk about different topics from money to money to dating to careers and things like that. And so I think it's well done. They work well as a team. They're pretty funny. I like things that make me laugh. And so it's a really good, well done podcast. And both of those are under O Big Ron Studios, who helps edit my podcast. So I definitely show them support, and I definitely think that you should check those podcasts out. The next one is Politics and Bros. So I know Michael Mann from CrossFit and we used to live together, and he has a show with his friend Ryan Tetchler. I've never met, but and they literally break down what's going on in politics. For me, I'm not super involved. I don't watch on television, so I get a lot of my politics information from podcasts, not only just NPR politics, but I get it from this show. And I think that the discussions and how they relate and tell what is going on in politics is very easy to digest for those that are just kind of like want to know what's going on, but from like a bro perspective. So I think it's well done. And I think that the way they deliver their content is, it's almost like you're having a beer with these guys and talking politics. So it's very, very enjoyable, and I like that. So, definitely find my information from podcasts about what's going on in politics. And I think that this is a good resource for those that just want to listen and learn about what's going on in politics in a very easy way. The next one is the number 7 I have on this list is the Happiness Podcast. I just found it. I was doing Positive Filter. I just looked up happiness and randomly came upon this one. It's by a guy named Dr. Puff. He just breaks down different ways to view the world and how going back to the root of it is happiness. How happiness is a journey. Happiness is on a spectrum and continuum. You're not just happy and sad. And I just like how he delivers little digestible. His episodes are not that long, but they give me a jump start on how to to reframe my thinking positively, and it helps me to deliver content to the Positive Filter. So, for those that are in the dumps or, struggling with depression or things like that, and they kind of want to just have an audio message of things to do and work on and just a nice voice, Dr. Puff's Happiness Podcast is a very good one. Number 8 is the Idea of Manhood. I found this through my friend Ryan Griffin. I believe one of his frat brothers made this podcast. I think his name is Mike Andrews. I wrote it down. His podcast is about the everyday man experience. He's a father. He's an educator. I'm very similar to me. I'm an educator. I'm a father. And he just talks about his everyday experiences and things that he's going through and his thoughts. And he's very transparent. He goes off. I don't think he writes his content down. He kind of goes off the dome. And I just appreciate his authenticity and just his realness with that podcast. So I listen to it from time to time. I think one episode that really stuck out was just do something. And like he was talking about in regards to just doing a podcast for yourself. And one time I just needed to hear that message, and it helped me just start my podcast. So I appreciate that. And so that's a good one to listen to. Number 9 is the Transparency Report. I believe the host is Alex Stone. I found out his podcast through his brother-in-law. And it's just a great, they said a podcast for woke people. So me being a black male, it's good to see a message about oppressive forces going on in the United States, and just a well-crafted, not say debate, but well-crafted message of how what is going on is affecting, people of color, and how we need to be, educated, informed, quote unquote woke about what's really going on in the presentation of people of color. So I really appreciate that podcast. It helps me just kind of reframe my thoughts about what's going on when I see things in the news. So I find that is a very helpful podcast for me, particularly being a black male. I think that if you don't agree with everything that this podcast says, I think that listening to both sides of the spectrum on what's going on in the United States is helpful. And you may learn something and be exposed to something. So that's a good one. And then last, number 10 is the Panda Watch podcast by my friend Kevin Ma and Steven Zubrak. Sorry, murdered his name. But he was a guest on one of my podcasts, I think episode 3, about overcoming fear. And he kind of helped me just think about creating a podcast. And his conversation's kind of similar to the Transparency Report. They talk about things that are going on in a different perspective in the news, but then they also talk about sports, and it's pretty funny. It makes me laugh. They post episodes of their podcast every now and then, but the episodes that they do post I listen to, and I find them very enjoyable. And so those are 10 podcasts that I listen to. I have the links. I think that one way to support them is by sharing their podcast or listening into them. I have all the iTunes links, and I think that all of them deserve positive reviews on iTunes. So I'll make sure, practice what I preach, go through and make sure I give a positive review about all those podcasts on iTunes, because I think they're well done. They inspire me. They help me see that other people are chasing their dreams or trying to get a message out regards on many different topics, as you see: politics, happiness, news, sports, just being a person and dating. And so I think that just having a wide range of podcasts and things like that helped me. So I definitely encourage you to check it out, listen to them, give them a listen. Please continue to support me, the host of the Positive Filter. Give me a good review on iTunes or Stitcher. I really appreciate those things. Keep supporting me. I love you all. Have a nice day.